Number 10. The Blonde and the Brunette. On April 16, 2021, a woman was taken in by the LAPD after being mistaken for another woman with the exact same name, and she had to spend her entire vacation behind bars. Bethany Farber, a 30-year-old aesthetician, was wrongfully arrested at Los Angeles International Airport and was detained in jail for almost 2 weeks. Farber was on her way to Mexico for a family vacation when she was called to the ticket counter and then escorted into the hall by the TSA officers. There, she was arrested for a statewide fugitive warrant in Texas, which she immediately denied since she'd never even been to Texas before. She was cuffed to a chair and later taken into custody by the LAPD, who failed to confirm her identity despite her protests. Farber's lawyer, Rodney Diggs, revealed that the LAPD didn't try to verify her identity at all and failed to do the bare minimum of their job, such as checking her phone, birth date, social security number, fingerprints through a live scan, or photos of the other Bethany. Instead, they denied her the ability to be released on bail and detained her in jail for 12 days until they realized that they had the wrong person. Diggs obtained a photo of the woman who was actually wanted in Texas and showed that they looked nothing alike. The 34-year-old woman who was wanted for property damage had brown hair, brown eyes, and a round face, whereas Farber had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a sharp chin. In court documents filed in February 2022, Bethany stated that city officials and law enforcement didn't care about her safety and constitutional rights, and that her wrongful arrest, interrogation, and detention led to anxiety and symptoms of PTSD. She claimed that the incident had even led to the death of her maternal grandmother, who suffered a stress-induced stroke after learning of her granddaughter's arrest. Despite being contacted by the Texas courts, informing them that Farber wasn't the person with an arrest warrant against her, officers held her for an additional 3 days. Farber's lawyer stated that there's been no explanation for the delayed release of his client. Her lawyers are now filing a civil suit against the LAPD for wrongful arrest and detainment, citing violations of her 4th and 8th Amendment rights. Number 9. 40 years gone by. On November 23, 2021, a man was released from prison after 40 years of serving time for a crime he never committed. Kevin Strickland, who was 62 years old at the time of his release, is a man from Kansas City who'd been imprisoned for over 40 years for 3 murders. But he was eventually released from jail after a judge stated that he was wrongfully convicted in 1979. The victims were 21-year-old Larry Ingram, 20-year-old John Walker, and 22-year-old Sherry Black. Strickland has always claimed that he was watching television at home and wasn't involved in the murders, which occurred when he was just 18 years old. When he learned of the decision to free him, he was apparently watching a soap opera on TV in prison. In a statement to reporters as he left the Western Missouri Correctional Center in Cameron, he said he wasn't necessarily angry, but experiencing a mix of emotions like joy, sorrow, and fear. He also said that he was still trying to figure out how to process exactly how he was feeling. He also expressed interest in getting involved in efforts to prevent others from experiencing the same injustice he did, noting that the criminal justice system needs to be overhauled. The ruling came after a 3-day evidentiary hearing requested by a Jackson County prosecutor, in which Judge James Welsh found that evidence used to convict Strickland had since been recanted or disproven. Welsh concluded that clear and convincing evidence was presented that undermines the court's confidence in the judgment of conviction, as there was a lack of physical evidence linking Strickland to the crime scene and a key witness before her death. Following the ruling, Jackson County prosecutor Gene Peters Barker swiftly moved to dismiss the criminal charges against Strickland so he could be released immediately. Despite this, Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmitt, who's running for U.S. Senate as a Republican, refused to accept Strickland's innocence and fought to keep him imprisoned. Schmitt's spokesperson said that they were defending the rule of law and the decision made by the jury in the case. Meanwhile, Governor Mike Parson tweeted that the Department of Corrections would immediately proceed with Strickland's release, respecting the court's decision. Even though Strickland has been freed, he's not eligible for wrongful imprisonment payments because he was exonerated through DNA evidence. Number 8. The Greedy Friendship. On November 12, 2014, a Salem, Oregon woman was taken in by the LAPD after being accused of befriending people just to scam them out of their money. 24-year-old Vicheka Lai, also known as V, was hit with theft charges after being accused of stealing thousands of dollars from people she befriended in Oregon. According to friends and family, Lai would get close to people throughout Oregon and then steal their cash, credit cards, and their trust. One of her alleged victims was Taylor Nunez, a 22-year-old aspiring pastry chef who said she became friends with Lai after meeting her at a fundraising event in Portland during the spring of 2013. Nunez said Lai showered her with compliments and even claimed to be close with famous people such as LeBron James and other various movie stars. She was always there for Nunez, including when her beloved dog passed away. The victim trusted her new friend so much that Lai even helped pick out an apartment for them to share together. But things quickly went downhill when Nunez noticed $400 of unfamiliar charges on her credit card. The woman's expensive hair straightener was also missing, and she noticed that Lai had begun flashing large amounts of cash during their shopping sprees. After Nunez confronted her so-called friend about the stolen money and she denied it, Lai disappeared a few days later, telling Nunez that she was going to Los Angeles. Nunez went to the police to report the theft, and upon investigation, they discovered that Lai had a history of being accused of stealing from her friends. Lai was taken in on November 12th because of a 911 call from her new roommates, Jamie Charoon and Margot Valley, whom she'd been staying with for 2 weeks. When they became skeptical of her unbelievable stories and proceeded to Google her entire identity, they discovered Facebook pages and Twitter profiles devoted to finding Lai, and they found that she had a long history of fraud and theft. Valley and Charoon were taken aback by what they discovered and subsequently called the police. Lai faced charges of theft, forgery, and theft of identity, as well as extradition back to Oregon. She was held without bond at the Century Regional Detention Facility in Linwood in the meantime. Although the case happened in 2014, it's difficult to find any information as to what the woman's sentencing was. So, unfortunately, the outcome is unclear. Number 7. The Terrible Donation Scam. In March 2023, a Rhode Island woman was jailed for pretending to be a Marine veteran and fraudulently making $250,000 from her scheme. 32-year-old Sarah Jane Cavanaugh, a woman who pretended to be a cancer-stricken Marine Corps veteran, received a large amount of money in donations. She claimed to have served in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2009 until 2016, and that she developed lung cancer as a result of exposure to burn pits. She even wore medals that she bought online and attended veterans events where she asked others to tie her shoelaces because she claimed to have war-related injuries to her fingers. Her web of lies started when she was working as a social worker at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Providence. Using her position, she accessed the records of a real Marine with cancer and falsified documents to state that she served in the Army before being honorably discharged. Cavanaugh even purchased a Purple Heart and Bronze Star medal online and wore them in public. She was named commander of a Veterans of Foreign Wars post and received over $225,000 from the Wounded Warriors Project alone. She also collected $18,500 from the Code of Support in Virginia and $4,700 through a fundraising website. She claimed she couldn't afford the insurance deductibles for her cancer treatment, so a real veteran paid for them for her, costing the individual nearly $600 a month. This generous veteran was also the same person Cavanaugh had stolen medical details from. Cavanaugh's story began early in 2022 when she requested for funding from the Hunter 7 Foundation. Her lies were uncovered, though, when the organization completed a background check on her military service history. Veterans were outraged by Cavanaugh's claims during her trial, accusing her of diverting funds from those who actually needed them. She was charged with forged military discharge certificates, aggravated identity theft, 4 counts of wire fraud, and fraudulent use of military medals. She pleaded guilty and was ordered to repay all the money she'd received. Veterans groups called the 32-year-old out for taking advantage of the nation's goodwill and disrespecting the deserving veterans. In the end, Kavanaugh was sentenced to almost 6 years in prison. Number 6. A poisonous date. In February 2019, a woman from New York was charged with attempted murder after allegedly trying to kill her doppelganger friend Olga Tisvik by feeding her poisonous cheesecake and then stealing her identity. According to the prosecutor, 47-year-old Victoria Nazirova left behind DNA evidence all over the cheesecake box and talked about her crimes during interviews from jail. The cheesecake box apparently had the tranquilizer phenazepam in it, as well as the defendant's DNA. The prosecutor also mentioned that media interviews Nazirova gave after her arrest would be a focus during the trial. Tisvik, the alleged victim in the case, testified that Nazirova came to her home in Queens in August 2016, claiming to need an emergency touch-up appointment, and brought a famous cheesecake from a well-known bakery along with her. After eating 2 slices of cheesecake, Tisvik was offered a 3rd slice, which prosecutors claim was laced with phenazepam. Tisvik felt sick about 20 minutes after eating the cake and started vomiting. Prosecutors believe Nazirova then stole Tisvik's passport, cash and other items before disguising the act as an attempt made by the woman to end her own life by strewing pills around the victim's body. Another witness was called to testify during the trial, a man who claimed Nazirova drugged him after they met on a Russian dating site in 2016. This man allegedly ate food that she cooked and woke up 3 days later in the hospital, which is when he noticed that his watch and cash were missing. Nazirova previously pleaded guilty to attempted larceny in a case involving allegations of drugging and robbing men she met on dating apps. She is also accused of drugging and killing her neighbor in Russia, setting the body on fire and fleeing to New York. But Nazirova's defense attorney, Christopher Hoyt, argued that the current case isn't as clear-cut as the prosecution claims. However, if Nazirova is found guilty of attempted murder, burglary and other charges, she could face up to 25 years in prison. Do you think the police could have prevented this by sending her to prison earlier? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 5. Like mother, like daughter. In 2016, a woman stole her own daughter's identity and continued to pretend as if she was her for over 2 years. Laura Oglesby, a 48-year-old woman from Missouri, recently pleaded guilty to fraud after assuming the identity of her estranged daughter, 22-year-old Lauren Ashley Hayes. Oglesby applied for a social security card in her daughter's name and used it to obtain a driver's license, and then enrolled in a university. She embezzled over $25,000 in the process and received federal student loans and grants, as well as financial aid from Southwest Baptist University. Oglesby was able to convince the locals in the small town of Mountain View that she was 22 years old and attending college. Even her boyfriends believed that she was that age. In 2018, the story of Laura Oglesby began to unravel after authorities in Arkansas contacted the Mountain View Police Department. At the time, Oglesby was living with a couple, Avery and Wendy Parker, who took her in from a nearby women's shelter after she claimed she was running away from a domestic violence situation. The Parkers treated Oglesby as if she was their own, but they started noticing red flags. So they eventually sought out a family member who lived in the same town Oglesby claimed to be from. While that was going on, investigators were hard at work figuring out who she really was. Oglesby's crimes astonished and enraged the couple, and she was imprisoned within 24 hours. She's currently facing up to 5 years in jail without the possibility of parole for Social Security fraud. She also owed the university $17,521 in compensation and was ordered to pay the restitution to her daughter, as well as for stealing her identity, according to court documents. Number 4. The Vigilante family. In May 2021, at around 11:30 one night, a group of 4 family members, including a teenager, his mother, father, and his uncle, murdered a man after they mistook him for a vandal targeting their property. 29-year-old Eddie Clark was shot and killed in his car as he was driving home. The Harris County Sheriff's Office has charged the teenager, 19-year-old Joe Argueta, with the man's murder because he was apparently responsible for shooting Clark in the abdomen. Video footage shows Clark's car being boxed in by the Argueta family's vehicles and then being fired upon. According to the local authorities, Joe Argueta fired multiple shots at Clark's vehicle as he tried to drive away. Clark's car, which had been shot multiple times, went off the road and then crashed into a tree. The victim tried to flee on foot, but eventually collapsed and was later found with a fatal gunshot wound. 39-year-old Florinda Argueta, Joe's mother, had told investigators that they suspected that a teenage friend of Joe's ex-girlfriend was damaging their property and that the suspect drove a black Dodge Charger, which was a different car to the one that Clark was driving. Deputies were later informed that Clark suffered a cardiac arrest while on his way to the hospital. But at this point, investigators don't believe there were any prior conflicts between him and the Argueta family. Joe's father and uncle have since gone on the run. Clark's friend, Albert Orsberry Jr., who'd been trying to purchase a truck with the victim, said that Clark was a gentle and hard-working man who loved his family and friends. Luckily, the suspects have been charged with murder, including Joe Argueta, who's admitted to firing the shots that ended Clark's life. Number 3. A cruel mistake. On June 13, 2022, a man was stabbed through his skull by a person who mistook him to be someone else. 55-year-old Randy Beauchesney was severely beaten during a visit to Saskatoon's Royal University Hospital with his daughter Dania, who needed medical attention. Randy was at the cafeteria when a man approached him from behind and drove a screwdriver through his head, piercing deep into his frontal lobe, according to Dania. Although Dania wasn't there during the incident, nurses told her what had occurred. 39-year-old Kevin Wichakan was charged with Randy's attempted murder, although court filings didn't specify the weapon that was used. On June 14th, police issued a statement describing the incident that occurred within the hospital. Investigators believed this was likely a case of mistaken identity, meaning that Randy wasn't the intended target. Dania says that her father had stepped away to help an old friend of hers pay for her parking, but he didn't return. She tried calling and texting him, but there was no response. Randy, who survived cancer twice, remained in the intensive care unit in critical but stable condition, according to his daughter. He barely had any feeling on his left side, and the extent of the brain damage was unknown to the doctors at the time. He could hardly speak and faced a lengthy road to recovery, but his life was cut short before he could bounce back. In August 2022, Saskatoon police confirmed that Randy had succumbed to his injury and passed away at the hospital. Wichakan was initially charged with attempted murder, but after Randy's passing, he was charged with second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison as a result. Number 2. A short trip back home. In June 2022, a man was released from jail after being wrongfully convicted of assaulting a young girl in 1986, only for him to wind back up behind bars. 57-year-old Edward Clayton Taylor was released from prison after serving 33 years, but he was arrested shortly after for attempted murder. He was overjoyed when his solicitors successfully appealed his conviction, but his freedom was short-lived. Taylor was charged in 1986 for assaulting a 4-year-old girl who tested positive for gonorrhea. According to the Innocence Project, there was no DNA evidence linking Taylor to the crime, and the child's statements were unclear. However, he is now facing the possibility of a longer prison term after police accused him of shooting a man after an altercation in Jacksonville. Taylor was caught on camera approaching the victim and shooting him in the chest before departing the area in his car. Several males then pulled out their guns and began shooting at Taylor's vehicle. Police found bullet holes in the suspect's car during an attempt to question him about the shooting, but Taylor denied being the gunman and has since requested an attorney. Taylor's mother, who was upset when she learned of her son's imprisonment, revealed that he'd swiftly relapsed into unsafe relationships after his release from prison. Despite Taylor's recent arrest, the Florida State Attorney's Office announced that it will continue to support him in the child assault case. He was given parole in 2019, but his conviction was reversed in 2022 thanks to the Innocence Project, which contended that the evidence used to convict Taylor was untrustworthy. But in the end, Taylor was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was 21 at the time of his first arrest, but barely a month after his release, at the age of 57, he was sentenced to life in jail without the option of parole. Number 1. Baby name theft. In July 2022, a couple from Hawaii was suspected of stealing the IDs of dead babies for decades. Walter Primrose and Gwyn Morrison, who are both over 60 years old, were charged with the crime. According to court documents, the pair had previous ties to the Soviet Union's former intelligence agency. Walter, a defense contractor and member of the U.S. Coast Guard for decades, used Bobby Edward Fort's bogus ID to obtain driver's licenses, passports, and Defense Department credentials, which led him to receiving a secret security clearance with the military as a defense contractor. The pair was charged with aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit an offense against the United States, and lying on a passport application. They were apprehended on a Hawaiian island in July 2022, and prosecutors wanted them held without bail. They claimed that if the husband and wife weren't imprisoned prior to the trial, there was a significant risk that they'd flee. According to the feds, the pair apparently had other probable identities. They were also photographed wearing KGB uniforms in old Polaroid images. Gwyn's close associate claimed she lived in Romania while it was a Soviet bloc country. Walter enrolled in the Coast Guard as Bobby Fort when he was 39 years old and worked as an avionics electrical specialist until he retired in 2016. In 1987, the couple adopted the identities of deceased children, although court papers don't explain why they did this. According to an affidavit from a State Department special agent, the couple lost their Texas home to foreclosure that same year. Walter and Gwyn were born in 1955 and went to high school and college in Texas before marrying in 1980. Julie Lynn Montague's father, who died when his daughter was only 6 weeks old in 1968, was shocked to learn that his daughter's name had been exploited in the couple's criminal scheme. The couple's lawyer declined to comment on the allegations. The case is still ongoing, and despite the fact that they're in custody, no verdict has been given yet. Would you rather find out that someone you know has been using your identity in order to catfish people online, or discover that your long-distance boyfriend or girlfriend, who you've only spoken with on the phone, isn't who they claimed to be? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Bad Badger.